Okay, recording is started. Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to the PowerShell user group in New York City. Again, I'm your host, Doug Fink, and it's a pleasure to have you. And we're looking forward to having Jaap talk about Azure Functions. Before we get going though, I just wanna, I know everybody that's on tonight has actually RSVP'd through the meetup site. So just to take you through, next month, we're going to have Rob Sewell, one of the folks who helps build the DBA, the PowerShell DBA tools. And they just wrote a book, Chrissy Lemaire, and he wrote the book, and one other person, Claudio Silvia, I think his name, that wrote the book about SQL in a month of lunches, I believe, or DBA tools in a month of lunches. So he'll be up next month. Looks like a real fun talk. He's going to talk about the SQL piece. He's going to talk about notebooks and a whole bunch of other things. He's going to talk about notebooks and how to write interactive notebooks for using this piece. I think he's going to use Azure Data Studio, and I believe he's going to do Visual Studio Code with .NET Interactive Notebooks. So that should be something you want to check out. So if you get back on the meetup, you can RSVP to that as well. The following month, Matthew Dowse is going to be joining us. How to automate the admin. He just wrote a new book as well. So he's going to come on and talk, and we'll see if we can get some free books from him that we can raffle off. And that's going to be in September. And then in October, we have Mike Kanakos, who's he runs the Research Triangle user group. I spoke there last month on my PowerShell Excel module. Hopefully the recording will be out soon. And he's going to walk us through secrets management, some of the new modules that the PowerShell team delivered. So looking forward to that. And we have some more speakers in the pipeline. If you would like to speak, drop me an email, find me on Twitter. Let me know what you'd like to talk about. If you want to talk about a project that you're working with, I sometimes put a bunch of people on in one meetups presentation. We'll have 4 or 5 speakers, do 5, 10, 15 minutes, talk about different things that they're working on. And that's always fun to watch and learn from. So if you would like to do something like that, that's great. If you want to get your feet wet, this is a real open community, real warm, welcoming community. So if you want to get your feet wet and practice doing some speaking, would love to have you. So think about it, let me know. And the last piece I wanted to cover is, I'll drop this in the chat room. The recordings that I do for the meetups is I put up here on the YouTube channel, and you can go back and check out some of the ones we've had before. Don Jones has been on. We had Jason Helmick from the PowerShell team talk about a bunch of things. So they're all out there. Again, I'll drop that link in the chat room. And if you subscribe and hit the notification bell, you'll know when I post other videos from meetups coming down the line. And I also post PowerShell videos as well as other types of videos about different types of technologies in the Microsoft space. So something worth watching. Housekeeping is done. So again, welcome, Jaap. Really appreciate you coming on to talk to us. I don't remember, what was the last time that you were here? You were in New York. It was a few years ago.
That was let me think. I think 2018 is the last time I've been on the East Coast.
Gotcha. Yeah. So yeah, you came by. We did it all in person. It was really great. So tonight, looking forward to having you talk about Azure Functions. And Jaap is a senior developer advocate at Rubrik, and he's been a MVP, Microsoft MVP for a number of years. Always fun to watch him talk. Always insightful what he has to show. So really looking forward to tonight. So I'm going to stop sharing, and if you're ready to share your screen and kick off, be great.
Absolutely.
And as we go along, if you want to ask questions, drop them in the chat room. I'll be watching that as well as Jaap, and we'll get to the questions as we go along. All right.
All right. Then you should be able to see my screen now.
Yes, I can.
Excellent.
Okay, you're on.
Thank you. So having fun with Azure Functions. Let's see, buttons. There we go. So my name is Jaap Brasser, as Doug already introduced me. Yeah, first of all, before I continue, you have a great lineup of speakers coming up, so that's very exciting. And actually, DBA Tools just passed 1 million download threshold on the PowerShell gallery, so it was a pretty cool one for the team over there.
Nice.
To follow up on what you said about getting your first speaking experience in at a user group, I also started speaking at a PowerShell user group. I have to think now. I think it was 9 years ago for the Dutch PowerShell user group that I currently run. So if you are interested in the technology, if you feel you have something to share, definitely reach out to Doug, because it's a worthwhile experience.
And just to follow up on that, I mean, I know that Don Jones talks about soft skills, and a geek that can present makes more money. I'll leave it at that.
Definitely too. So the agenda for today, I'll do a quick intro about the different tools we have in Azure. So with the tools, I mean specifically the serverless tools. Then we'll go into Azure Functions, first with a couple of considerations. Then we'll go a little bit deeper into how you can deploy your Azure Functions, what kind of possibilities you have there. And we're going to go to the different ways that you can work with it. So you can think of things like using Cloud Shell, using the portal, or using VS Code. Unfortunately, today I'm presenting from a different location than normal, so I'm using my MacBook. So my VS Code is not set up for success, but I'll still show the errors, but there won't be a lot of deployments coming out of my VS Code today. And there will be time for a bunch of demos and Q&A time at the end. So as Doug already said, if you have any questions during the session, just ask. I try to keep an eye on the chat. I'm on a single monitor, so it might take a couple of minutes before I actually see it. And otherwise, Doug, feel free to interrupt me, because I'm not easily interrupted. I can always finish my sentence. So with that, about the photos in the presentation. So all the photos in here are taken in Amsterdam. I figured well, except for this one, of course, because that was I had to have something New York in there. So I just Googled and got the 20th result of a New York picture. But anything else are all pictures from Amsterdam. So do visit once if you ever have the chance. Feel free to hit me up when you're there. So Azure Functions and how they actually fit into the bigger picture within Azure and serverless. So there's a couple of serverless options that I wanted to highlight before going deeper into Azure Functions. And the way that I've organized these are in increasing level of complexity, although arguably functions can be more complex than app service, but I won't go too deep into that right now. So we have Microsoft Power Automate, formerly known as Microsoft Flow. So in Power Automate, you still have flows, but it's no longer called Flow. So not confusing at all, but it's called Power Automate now, and that's the almost no-code version of serverless that Microsoft offers within Azure /365. If you want to go a level deeper, then we have the Azure Logic apps, so that allows for a bit more customization and more code. Then you get to Azure Functions. So if you're familiar with either writing scripts or you have a programming background, then Azure Functions are the right option for you. And then there's also the Azure App Service. And Azure App Service, Azure Functions are actually part of the Azure App Service. So why would we go for Azure Functions? What kind of benefits can it bring to us? One of the reasons is that there's a lot of triggers available that we can use to trigger our functions in our code. There's a support for many languages, although today we'll mostly be looking at what we can do with PowerShell. There's different deployment options, and you can also choose from different operating systems in which to run your functions. Another upside of it is you can just pay what you use. So writing the function and storing it in Azure doesn't cost you much. You have to pay for the storage account, but an Azure function is quite small, so it doesn't take up too much space. Actually, most of the space that an Azure function consumes is by logging. So that's also something to consider when you're deploying it. Make sure that you configure your logging appropriately. Because it's serverless, you don't have any infrastructure to manage, so that can save you both time and money. Initially, when I got started with taking my scripts to the cloud about 10 years ago, I just spun up a VM and just eternally had it running with task scheduler to execute all the scripts and all the code that I wanted to run. Let's see, got a comment from Alexander. Yes, pay what you use only applies to the consumption plan, but I'll get into the different plans that are available. There's actually 3 different options that we have here, and we'll get to that in a bit. So you don't have to maintain any service, so that's a benefit. If you already have an existing web app subscription, you can also place your Azure functions in there. So if you're already working with that, you can make use of the money that you're already spending and host your functions there. And you can also simplify the kind of code that you write, because you don't have to take into account what kind of environment it's running in. So you only have to view the code from the context of an Azure function and not the underlying infrastructure. So some of the considerations once you get started with it. To answer your question, Amir, the recording will be available on YouTube. So like PowerShell and most programming languages, thanks for sharing that, Doug. Most programming languages, there's error handling available, so we can. There's multiple log files and even application insights available to track how your functions are performing, if there's errors there, or if everything is going right. And we'll go over that in a little bit. I'll show some functions. I'll break the functions, and I'll show what kind of output we can get when we're testing that. And then it comes to scaling. So one of the advantages is that an Azure function, once you place it, once you've created it, it doesn't matter if you execute, well, within reason, it doesn't matter if you execute it once a day or 1,000 times a day. the function will always be available and can be executed as many times. So you don't have to take into account what kind of underlying infrastructure you have, or if you have a server, then it might not be able to process that many requests. But in Azure Function, if you have the consumption plan, you can you don't have to consider scaling. It can be executed as many times as it's called. If you do have very strict requirements for speed, then the only option is the premium plan. That gives you more flexibility and also beefier machines on which your code runs. But for my use case with Azure Functions, I haven't run into any limitation of the consumption plan yet. So creating a function app in a portal is quite simple. Just type create function app in the search bar, and you'll be taken to the process. The important things to highlight are the fact that you can choose your runtime stack, and this is something that you do for your entire function app. So the structure of your function app is the top level is the function app, and that contains one or more, zero or more functions that can be executed using different triggers. Once you create it, you also get the option of how you want to work on your function. So you can use the browser and write the code there, but in general that's a pretty bad idea, because the editing experience on the Azure portal isn't fantastic. So since it's a PowerShell user group, what are some common reasons to use PowerShell? I have the feeling that I'm preaching to the choir here, but it's an interactive scripting language. It already comes bundled with Windows. Unfortunately, the version that gets bundled with Windows, even with Windows 11, is still Windows PowerShell 5.1, so quite outdated by now. And since it's been open source, it's also cross-platform, which is why I'll be able to run all the PowerShell code on my Mac today. So when running PowerShell locally, assuming that you have a Windows machine, you can run both Windows PowerShell and PowerShell. So after version 5, PowerShell was briefly called PowerShell Core, and starting in PowerShell 7, it was renamed to just PowerShell. If you're using Azure Automation, there's only Windows PowerShell available in there. And in Azure Functions, you have just regular PowerShell 7 available. So before we're going to go into the your first Azure function and what kind of deployment models we have there, I'll just jump over, give a quick overview of what it looks like if you're in the portal and you're going to take a look at creating a function and running and testing that function. And let's switch that one over. I can share my whole desktop. I think that will probably be easiest. Cool. So I'll pull up Chrome. So if we're in the Azure portal, we have a couple of options here what we can do. So if we want to create a function app, we can go here, create function. Typing is hard. Create a function app. We go in here, can see there's already quite some function apps in here. The interesting bit about this is that if we go to app services, we can see that we have exactly the same list of functions apps in here. So this is to show that a function app is nothing more than an Azure web app that has a variable configured stating that it's a function app. Cool. So if we're going to take a look at some of the basic PowerShell functions that we have, let me refresh this one. So I've already created the New York PowerShell function app. In this function, we can see that, that there's two functions in here. Before we're going to take a look at those, I'll go over what we have in here. So we have the overview here, and we can see and also download the application content. So this is useful if you want to open this up in Visual Studio. You can press the download button and you get all the data and you can start working with it locally. So that's definitely the preferred way of doing this. For other configuration options, we have configuration available here. Yeah, I can get to that, AJ. So the question in chat is, can I talk about scenarios where you can choose between the different serverless platforms that are there? Yeah, I'll cover that in a bit. I'll just go over this demo and then we can get into that. So all the configuration settings are here. So you can see all the settings that are set here. So we can see that the New York PowerShell is running PowerShell and it's running Functions version 3. And if we go into New York PowerShell itself, we can also see the additional resources that are here because it's more than just a function app. You know, if we open up the resource group, we can see that we also have a storage account available here. And if you're going to dive deeper into functions, you want to start taking a look at this because all the configuration data is here, but also the log files are stored here.
So what region are you running in? Because it looks pretty snappy. It's pretty fast response.
This one is Western Europe. So that is, I think it's like 30 miles away from me, the data center.
Perfect. Thanks.
So let's actually start to take a look at the code. So I'll do it from the portal first. So what you can see here, we have an HTTP trigger. And if we take a look at the code, we can see that the PowerShell code doesn't look any different from regular PowerShell code. The only thing that is different is the push output binding, in which we specify what kind of response this function gives. So it is not necessary for a function to actually give a response. If the goal is just to initiate another job, do some data processing, or make any kind of change within Azure, just a status code.
Well, that looks like he froze, or did I lose him, or did I lose everybody?
I think it was just Jaap.
Hey, Justin.
How you doing?
Good. Yeah, actually, he said he lost his machine and he spent. Yeah, I definitely jinxed him. He actually lost his machine today. He had to rebuild it, and that's why he's using his Mac. All right, I'll keep an eye out for him. Hopefully, he'll be able to get back on. Wow, so last month we had Josh King, and he presented on Windows Toast. And a few minutes into his demo, he was not able to display the toast. And it took several concepts to go through to where he finally actually decided to play a video and then narrate over the video of an older demo that he had. And Jaap told me today that again he lost his machine and he spent most of the day rebuilding it, trying to get it ready for tonight. So I think I can try and get him on Twitter, but I'm sure all of his connections are down. So does anybody have an Azure Function demo in their pocket? Alexander, what do you have? Anything? Oh, he's back.
Hello.
Hey there.
My audio and video quality might be slightly worse now because I'm tethered over 4G because apparently my internet provider also decided to stop working, just like my computer today. It's all the signs are on red, but I'm just going to keep on going. Is my audio quality reasonable?
Yeah, it's really good. So is your video. I'm glad you made it back.
Yep, no problem. So let me just continue. What was the last thing you heard before I dropped off?
I think you were here showing you were showing the code inside the Azure function.
Okay, yep. So this is just a basic starter function. Whenever you create a PowerShell Azure function, this is what it will look like. So this isn't too spectacular. So in this case, I've selected a cat, and I can say New York PowerShell UG. And if I run this, let's see that we get the logs there. It's definitely slightly less snappy right now, but it's still workable. So you can see here, hello, and it's in this case, what it does, it populates the name because the request query name is available. If we were to break something in this code, so let's just do a throw statement in here. Just to give you an idea of how, let's save it first. So there we go. And if I would now execute this code, we can see that there will be HTTP response code should be 500. Yeah, internal server error. There's no response content, but we can see in the log file what actually happened here, and we actually get the full PowerShell error. So not the short and slightly useless PowerShell 7 error messages. So we can determine on which line our code is failing, and then we can just comment out the throw statement, and then it would work again. So if we actually want to get the URI of this function, we can click that here. And you can see here that we have the URI. What I'm going to do now is I'll switch over to VS Code and the correct window. Here we go. So now we'll actually do the same thing with PowerShell. So you can see we have the New York PowerShell. We have the HTTP trigger 1, which is the name of the function. And we can see that we have a code here. So for this function, we actually need to authenticate using this code. Otherwise, it won't execute. So we'll just do a get again and do an invoke web request directly to this Azure function. And I'm manually copy pasting this because I honestly have no idea how to run a single line on Mac OS. So if anyone knows, tell me in chat, and I've learned something new as well today. Sweet. So if you take a look at this URI, we can see that we have the code in here. Because we're doing GET requests, we can put the parameters in like this. So because it's all right. Is everything good, Doug?
Yeah, I think something, yeah, just you got muted, but you're back.
Ah, okay, yep. So you can specify the parameters for a get statement like this. So we can see we get the output here as we would expect. Then we also have the anonymous function. So with this one, no code is required. If you know the URI, you can just interact with this Azure function. So let's do that. We can see no authentication required here, so you can just access that directly. So those are some basic functions. And let me see. And AJ asked a question just before I dropped off. What some of the considerations are to either use Power Automate, Logic Apps, Azure Functions, or Azure Automation. So I think for me, Azure Automation, I haven't found a whole lot of use cases for it. My general impression of Azure Automation that it's better for long-running jobs or configuration jobs rather than what we're doing here with Azure Functions, a quick and short function that can execute a single task. As for Power Automate, Power Automate is if you're not familiar with coding, but you want to be able to connect services, and you don't have a lot of very strict requirements about what kind of data you get back, and you're going to do relatively minimal data manipulation yourself, then Power Automate is quite a powerful tool. So the way Power Automate works is that there are a couple I think, a couple thousand connectors available there. Those connectors, you can use them to connect to all different Azure Office 365 and third-party services, and you can interact with those services without having to write a single line of code. So you can just drag some blocks together, and as long as you don't want anything very specific, then Power Automate is a great tool. If you get to the point where you want to regex replace something in Power Automate, the easiest way I found to do that so far is to just write an Azure function and call that one from Power Automate. So the one does not exclude the other, because you can also tie them together. And then logic apps is something that I haven't worked a whole lot with, but my impression of logic apps is that it's like Power Automate, but slightly more complex, and you have more freedom to create your own workflows. And what Justin says is correct. Power Automate runs on top of logic apps, so Power Automate is a restricted logic app. And let's see.
Yeah, Francisco asked a question, but he had to go take a phone call, so I'll save it to the end. Maybe a little talk about comparing languages like PowerShell to Python in an Azure function, but when he gets back online.
Yep.
Cool.
Yep. I actually have some functions with some JavaScript. So
nice.
That's also there. I haven't done anything in Python yet, although most of the day today I have been writing Python code, so I should probably write a Python Azure function at some point. Justin also mentions that Azure Automation is one of the oldest Azure services, correct? And that's also the reason that there's only Windows PowerShell available in Azure Automation. I don't think there's even a roadmap to go to a more modern version of PowerShell there. Cool. With that, we can go back to the slides. So your first Azure function. I've given you a bit of a taste of what is possible with Azure Functions through the portal. Oh, yeah, I should actually show that before I go there. The reason I'm doing everything through the portal here is not because I like to do that, but it's because I am working on my Mac, and I spend the past 3 hours feverishly trying to get my Mac to work as well as my PC did until 4 p.m. today. But we can see that whenever I'm deploying any kind of function, it will error out. If I look here at the output, I can see that there's errors. If I browse in VS Code into my Azure Functions, then there's also errors in my functions. So the development experience on macOS hasn't been fantastic for me, but on Windows it was working great. So that's the upside here. Yep, PowerPoint again. Cool. So your first Azure function. So anything that is configured for your Azure function is basically just a bunch of JSON files that are stored in your storage account. So it's pretty lightweight. Everything is in JSON, so also quite easy to work with. And the only other thing but JSON, well, there's a couple more things. There's also some code in there. So I already touched on the fact that that there's a lot of apps in the Azure portal. So you have app services. So in app services, all your function apps are also present. Function apps are just Azure web apps with an environment variable set that says that they're a function app. That's the That's the main difference. The other difference is that you get a different interface in the portal when you're working with function apps compared to web apps. And then the functions are inside of the function apps. So you can have 0 or infinite functions within a single function app. And then we have the trigger templates. So the ones I'll be working with today are exclusively HTTP triggers, because I just like doing web requests, and it makes it really easy to hook it into other services. Justin also mentioned it in the chat, and it's also one of my use cases within Power Automate. Whenever I want to do a quick task in Power Automate, if I have to do it in Power Automate, I have to make 10 blocks. And if there's a single error in one of those blocks, my entire flow starts failing. And if I can write it in an Azure function and do the data manipulation that is very hard to do in Power Automate, you can very easily integrate that with a HTTP trigger. One of the downsides, if you want to do that in Power Automate, is that you need to have a premium subscription, so you can't do it on the cheap there. It used to be available, but they took it away from us. Already got comments on the plans. So there's 3 different plans available when you're working with when you're deploying your Azure function. I'm using the consumption plan because I like to do things on the cheap, and I have no need for the premium. Well, of course, I want the premium functionality, but I don't need the premium functionality. The third option is an app service plan. So if you're already using Azure Web Apps, then you can use that subscription to host your Azure functions inside there as well. Languages that are available: there's .NET Core, Node.js, there's Java, PowerShell Core, and Python. So there's no Windows PowerShell. In one of the in the early release of Azure Functions, there was still Windows PowerShell, but luckily that is no longer there. On the operating side of things, you can either run your code on Windows, on Linux, or in a Linux container, where the Linux container is your only option if you're using the is only an option if you're using the Functions Premium plan. So here is an overview. We're not going to go into all the details, but I think the most important data point is on the right here. And we can see that if you want to be able to do .NET, Node.js, Java, PowerShell, and Python within the same environment, so your only option is actually to have a premium plan. So if you want to run PowerShell Core, your only option in Azure Functions with a consumption plan is to run it on Windows. So that can be that can be a downside. As for deploying the Azure Functions, so it will be dev by portal today. Another way, my preferred way, is to develop, test, and debug my functions in VS Code. The Azure Functions extension and the Azure extension are really great for that. Other IDEs are also a possibility, mainly Visual Studio itself, but that one's a bit too much for me. You can also deploy directly from the Azure Cloud Shell, and once again, you can use the Azure Cloud Shell either through the portal, or you can use it from VS Code. So then we're back at VS Code again. You can also deploy directly to a GitHub repository. And the way that works is the moment you commit to a specific branch in the GitHub repository that's marked as the source for your Azure Function app, whenever there's a new commit there, the Function app will update. And the last one is to upload as a zip file. So you can also manually upload the zip file, or in an automated way, upload the zip file. There's some additional options there as well. So it's not just GitHub. So you could also be using Gitbucket, Azure repos, local Git, or even external Gits, OneDrive, or Dropbox. So there's plenty of different ways that you can actually deploy your function apps. And with that, are there any questions right now? Otherwise, I'll go into some demos and some of the stuff that I've actually built with Azure Functions. Cool. Oh. So there we go. One of the ones that I like, this one's actually part of a larger function that I've been putting together, and it was based on this one. So let me pull up my GitHub. So we take a look here. We can see that there's a nice visitors badge here, and I like this one so much that I started building it myself as an Azure function. Because initially, when I got this visitor badge on my GitHub profile, the server on which it was hosted was down all the time. So I started playing around with Azure Functions to see what I can do with it. So what I have, but what I cannot demo today, is the same kind of visitor badge. And using an Azure function, you can either display this or just track how many times your page is visited, and then store all the data in an Azure table. And to get there, we're going to this. Is it? Yeah, there we go. So what we can do here is can change this one into New York City and this one into PowerShell. So what this function will do is it will generate an SFG image file for us. So let's run this one and let's see what we're getting out of this one. So the HTTP response, if you look at it in the portal, well, this doesn't, well, it tells us a lot, but it's not really interesting information for us. So instead of doing it from the Azure portal, we'll head over to VS Code and we'll take a look at what we can do with this one. So the first thing I have is I'll go in here. So we can see that I specify the two parameters, which are first and second. So that's the first and second part of the SFG image that I'm editing. Let's see if James' solution works. Command Enter. No. Is it Control Enter? No. Okay. Copy pasting it is for me. So there we go. I invoke this REST method and we can see we get this SFG back, but we don't even see what is in there. If I expand it using select object, you can see that there's more information in here. And we can also output it to a test file. I already have test 1, so I'll just do test 2. So let's take a look at what this actually looks like. And if I open this one up, oh, yeah. Let's see how I can actually zoom in here, because it's a tiny image, because it's just a little badge. So we can see that it actually generated this SFG image with New York City and PS1. And the nice thing about this is you can actually run this one directly from your browser as well, because no authentication is required. So let's get another cool Unicode character in there. I like dogs, so I'll just get a picture of a dog as well. Let's copy paste that one and put that one in there instead of taxi. You can see that it actually will just regenerate this SFG file to it. And then we see it updates the SFG with whatever text you put in there. It doesn't matter if it's Unicode or any kind of code. So you can generate your own images using an Azure function. And that one. So the last one that I want to show before we'll go over to Q&A and get rid of my monologue is one that I've built. Let's see if I missed anything in the chat. See, Greg says F8 works on VS Code. I'm just going to try it. Yeah, that works. Thanks, Greg. I run a couple of user groups. One of the user groups that I run is DDoG, and we had a bit of an issue here. And our issue was that we had a contact form, and we got a lot of spam on the contact. So the obvious solution to that is to in there. So let's see if this actually wants to open. Let's see. This is hosted on GitHub, so I wouldn't expect it to be down. Maybe it's my internet connectivity. Yeah, it seems to be quite slow.
Yeah, GitHub looks like it's up.
Can you hear me again?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can see you.
Okay, perfect. I switched over to my wired internet again, so it should be better.
Okay.
Did I use durable functions? I haven't used durable functions. Or wait, that's a question to Justin. Yep, I'll leave that one then. So what we had is we had this contact form in order to get folks to submit if there's any questions or if anything happened, just to have a way for people to reach out if they don't have Twitter. So we ended up putting a CAPTCHA in there, and obviously we went for a fun CAPTCHA because boring CAPTCHAs are no good. So I got a Doom CAPTCHA. So I'll do it with sound off now. So we can shoot the monsters, and if you shoot the monsters, then the button will unlock. But unfortunately, this is not a this is not a very good CAPTCHA. It's more a funny more a funny CAPTCHA. And the bots, they were still able to press the button. So I decided to rewrite this CAPTCHA, add some new stuff in there, and this one was written in JavaScript. So that's also why I started writing the Azure function in JavaScript. So my very useful addition to this CAPTCHA was that I put the cheat code in there so you can get a bigger gun. This is obviously very critical for a CAPTCHA. So I put some effort in there. But one of the things that I want to make sure of, that if I have a CAPTCHA and people are still going to send data to us, I figured I can get an Azure function to just take the input from this form and just store it in the log files of my Azure function. So I still at least have a place to see where the spam messages go. They don't come in my inbox, they just end up in an Azure function. So that's what I put together, and let's open this one up. So it's aptly named CAPTCHA catch. So the way this works is that if we take a look here, so we can see that we can actually not see because this is compressed. So let's just toss this into VS Code. This is my favorite key combination in VS Code. And I kind of don't know what it is in Windows anymore now, but it's.
He almost lasted to the end. Oh, well. He said that he switched back to his ISP. I guess he went out again.
I'm really sorry about this.
That's okay. You're back. It's a little choppy.
Okay, yeah, I'm back on 4G. It's back to back from Wi-Fi.
Bummer. All right. Sorry.
Can
that
you?
happens. Yeah.
Okay, can you still hear me, or is the quality just bad?
No, that's fine. The quality's it's in and out a little bit, but it's mostly good. So
No,
go ahead.
okay. So what I've done here, instead of having this form go to the correct form, we've set it to go to an Azure function. And what happens when it goes to the Azure function? I'll go over here, open up that function. That was the reason that I also loaded in JavaScript, is because I was already writing JavaScript to update the CAPTCHA. So I just continued with that. And we can see that we just take the request body, we take the form data, and we get the information from the form data. So the name, the reply to, so the email address and the message. And then we just log that to the console. So it will be available in the log file. So this is basically a write host, what I'm doing here. And then at the end, I'll do a redirect to thank you, which is a non-existent domain. So if I would now do this and actually click this, we go to CAPTCHA catch thank you, which is non-existent. But if we take a look here, we can now see that if I actually had typed anything, then that would be logged in here. Oh, I'm in the wrong one. that would be logged in here. So let me go back and actually show that that will be logged. So now I see some. If I would now submit this, instead of going to the correct to the actual form, it will go to Azure Functions, and we can see that in the logs. I'm now connected to the stream, so I'll just send this one again instead of scrolling up. And then here we can see that it says NYC undefined and hello. So all the information is logged in this Azure function. And what happens when the captcha actually completes? Then there's just a replace in there that that will replace the form field, and it will actually submit to an actual form instead of an Azure function. So with that, I would like to go over to Q&A. And first of all, thanks to everyone for bearing with me with my poor connectivity today.
Thank you for going through all that, especially going through rebuilding your machine. Crazy. So if anybody has questions, you can either unmute yourself, or we've got a question in the chat. You want to, I guess. Yep.
I mean, it's always okay to ask questions how one product compares to another product. I have to say that I've done some basic stuff with Lambda, and I've done nothing with GCP functions. So maybe there's someone in here that did more with Lambda that can give a better impression of what the differences are.
So this is Justin. I can speak a little bit to Lambda. So Lambda was like first out of the gate with it. But what Lambda ends up being is the Lambda is basically just, they have a script that compiles your script into a .NET application, and then it just runs it that way. So the experience is kind of more along those lines, in that like you're building it, you're going through, but then like in the end, you just run a script that basically runs a .NET build that creates it into a .NET program and then just runs it as a .NET program. So it doesn't have a lot of the niceties around it that Azure Functions has, but because it works in that infrastructure, like if you know .NET really well, it can be pretty effective. And it does work fine if you want to write like those kind of serverless PowerShell things in AWS, but it's my feeling that at least the developer experience for Azure is much better. It took a little longer for them to actually get it out the door, but it's a much better experience if you're a PowerShell person.
Thanks, Justin. Any other questions, comments, or thoughts? Yeah, I've only did a little bit on AWS. I have done nothing with GCP or any of the other clouds. I figured it'd be less friction to use Azure and PowerShell, and it's always worked well, or pretty well.
Well, I think there's actually a very large part of the PowerShell team working on PowerShell products and projects within AWS.
That's a good point. Yes, a lot of folks punched out and went over to AWS. That's so true.
No, I understand why you wouldn't bother with GCP, because you might spend 2 years building all the functions on GCP, and then Google decides that the product no longer exists. So it doesn't seem like a great investment.
Good point. I heard a rumor that they actually banned folks in GCP from even using PowerShell, and to my knowledge, they actually told them to prefer Go over as a scripting approach, but I never confirmed those things. So yeah, Google's an interesting character.
As an interactive language, I find Go a bit harder to work with. For me, it's still most comfortable when I'm prototyping something and quickly slamming something together. Then a couple of lines of PowerShell are, for me, the fastest way to get some code out of the door.
I second the motion. Absolutely. So any other questions that people might have before we wrap this up? And Jaap, I really appreciate you doing a Herculean effort of doing all the things you did today to be here tonight and take us through this. It was great. Thank you.
No problem. And next time I'm there, I won't have any issues. So I think I had all of them for a couple of years now.
Yeah, hopefully, like I said when we chatted before, the Microsoft folks here in New York have started emailing me asking when I want to come back and start doing these in person in the Microsoft headquarters. So hopefully maybe next year or 2022, 2023, we'll see you in person again, would be great. And anybody else that would be interested to drop into New York would be awesome. And or I'll still do the virtual stuff and we'll have more speakers. But other than that, well, thanks for staying up late. No more questions, and thanks for everybody joining. And we'll catch you next month, hopefully. Get on the meetup, and I'll post this video in a couple of days. Thank you, Jaap. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, and have a great evening.
Okay, you too. All right, everybody, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.